Okay, the bottom bracket's the main transmission bearing in your bicycle. It's the one that the cranks rotate on. It's relatively important that it stays in good condition, and obviously sooner or later you're probably going to need to take it out either to replace it or to check the condition of the bearings. Removing it is really quite simple. You're going to need probably an 8mm Allen key, providing it's an external bearing type, and one of these, which is a bottom bracket removing tool. Works like this. Take the 8mm Allen key, pop it into the usually left-hand crank arm, and start to undo the crank like this. You should feel the crank pulling off quite quickly, quite easily. Occasionally they can be really stiff, and what you might have to do to start the thing off is to give it a bit of a jerk to really shock it to start it going, but this one's coming off quite easily, so we'll just continue to work it off. Be aware, of course, that as the crank comes to the end of its path, it could easily fall off the splines. There you go. If you have a look in there, you can see that the crank bolt remains in the crank. It never falls out even when it's undone. That's the back of the bolt, and it screws into the threads that are inside the axle. You can see that the axle itself is splined, and those fit into the splines that are inside the crank arm there. Unhook the chain, mallet, just give it a tap. That's the crank removed. As you can see, the axle that the bottom bracket goes through the bottom bracket is attached to the cranks. The next step is to use the bottom bracket tool to remove the bottom bracket cup. Fits on the splines, like so. Once you've undone it, it should undo. Remember that you've got a spacer on there. So if you've got spacers on there, it's best to leave them on. Same on the other side. Gives you a chance to clean the bottom bracket threads. They should feel clean and ever so slightly sharp edged, although not actually jagged in any way. Put some grease back in the threads, give that a work into the threads. Obviously, if you're fitting a new bottom bracket because your old one's worn out, remember to fit the same number of spacers as you took out on your old one. Also, make sure that you're using the correct cup for the side. This one here is a Truvativ bottom bracket, and it has non-drive side and an arrow indicating the tightening direction on it. A smidge more grease. Remembering you've already put some in the bottom bracket. Bring that up to the thread, feel it engage, and then begin to spin it in. If your threads are clean and tidy, that should spin all the way in to the bottom bracket cup. We'll just put a bit of extra grease on this cup. Again, present it to the threads. Again, I've rotated it the wrong way just to feel it click once it catches the first thread. Again, it should just screw all the way. Finish it off with a tighten. That's just the sound of the bike in the stand, not the plenty tight enough. That's perfectly fitted now. Next step, tiny little bit of grease on the axle just to keep it from having any corrosion. Hook the chain over the bottom bracket if you haven't already done so. Hook it over the bottom bracket, that way it's the right side of the cranks when you put them on. Present the crank to the bottom bracket. You'll see that the other end has poked through, and all we're going to do now is bring that home. Give that a tap. We can now bring our left-hand crank arm Back here, there's still some grease in here. That's fine, plenty of grease in there. Present the left-hand crank arm to the splines. By hand, it's easier to just get those to engage. Insert the Allen key. Begin to screw it in. Keep going. As you can see, that using a T-bar Allen key, did it up about as tight as I can, using the amount of torque available on that short handle, and then just to finish it, give it an extra one, and that should be about right on there. Next job, push down on the back of the derailleur. Gives you a nice bit of slack chain. Finger out from underneath. Draw it up onto the inner chainring, and then you can use the front gear shifter. Draw it up into gear, and that's your bottom bracket in and out. So with the chain back on the chain rings, you've now taken your bottom bracket completely out of the bike, cleaned it, serviced it or replaced it depending on what it is you need to do, and put it back. Now Shimano, FSA and Truvativ bottom brackets all work in essentially the same way. Shimano ones only really differ in the way that the bearings are preloaded. You will basically use a preload collar on the outside edge of the left-hand crank arm with a Shimano one, and then you would tighten that up to draw the cranks together, and then tighten up 2 pinch bolts to keep the crank on. But the Truvativ and FSA ones use exactly the same system as this. As you can see, it's a really simple job. It takes only an 8mm Allen key and an appropriate external bearing bottom bracket tool to remove and to replace the bottom bracket. It's a very simple job, take you about 10 minutes, all being well. Yeah, it's certainly a job you can achieve at home.